Hi, I'm Phoebe, and this is Innovate with Purpose, the Bridge for Billions podcast. In this series, we'll be looking at purpose-driven innovation and reimagining a new normal within the entrepreneurial ecosystem and beyond. Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Innovate with Purpose. It's great to have you back if you're a regular listener, and of course, welcome if you're joining us for the first time. So today I'm really excited to be discussing a topic which is going to be crucial in the way we reimagine our society post-Covid-19. And that's how we can design spaces, public and private spaces, which are appropriate for a new normal. To help us explore this topic, I'm happy to be joined by Samira, an advanced architect and director and founder of Need Lab, a non-profit organization which aims to solve problems related to habitat and urban resilience in cities and rural communities. Samira, it's great to have you with us. To get started, I'd love to know a little bit more about Need Lab. What's the project doing at the moment, and how does that tie in with COVID-19?
Hi, thank you for having me on your podcast, and it's great to be part of the Bridge for Billions family. I think you guys do a great job, and I'm happy to be here. So, Need Lab, we are a collective. We are designers, makers, engineers, psychologists, doctors from different fields getting together to solve problems that communities have with a human-centered, environment-centered way. We do this repeatedly with several problems the society is facing. We have 2 projects actively running during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had projects related to habitat, urban resilience, and designing products that give dignity to people. So one of the keywords when we work with communities is how to bring dignity and stability in their life. We believe that that's really important, and that's our main driving force. So about the COVID-19, so when the initial stages, let's say WHO announcing that it's a pandemic and that cities have to take severe precautions in terms of quarantining and, social distancing and all the rules that came out. When international borders were closed, we had several projects and they all came to a standstill. Construction sites were closed. We couldn't build anymore. So we decided to use the time of the designers and the expertise they hold into building something that's more impactful. So we came up with 2 different projects. One is Uno Mas Otro, which means one with another, a mental health-based platform where we support people with information how to deal with social isolation and topics related to mental health. And the other one is face mask disinfection device. This one specifically is a well-designed device which disinfects face masks, face shields, locally, and it can be produced distributedly anywhere in the world. So it's designed based on how it would work if it's in an old age home, how would the circulation work, how would the workflow be from a patient to a person to, let's say, someone who's operating the device, and what are the materials available in the most let's say, restricted quarantine zone. What if they don't have access to any stores? What can they use that's around them to build something? So yeah, those are the 2, I think, really cool projects that came out of the quarantine with all the designers being locked in.
That's great to know how Need Lab has approached the COVID-19 situation and created these new projects in a really resilient and purpose-driven way. And thinking about the bigger picture, kind of zooming out, if you like, onto cities themselves and the design of cities during this time. What current approaches are cities taking to find solutions to the challenges presented by COVID-19 in terms of space and restructuring? And how is this affecting legislation?
Actually, I'm really proud of a lot of cities around the world for the work they've been doing in response to the pandemic. A lot of cities have shown so much resilience. They've shown quick action And this you can see both in public spaces and also in, let's say, regulations that they have announced to keep people safe. If we take one half of the equation, which is public space, which is very important during this pandemic because everybody is quarantining in their house compared to before you had in a day access to your office, to a cafe, to a restaurant, and then you go back to your house. But during the pandemic, you're most of the time you're confined to a single space. Then what the city offers varied due to phases of quarantine. So when there's, let's say, in Barcelona, for example, we are in phase 1, 2, and 3 now, I think almost end of phase 2. The city has responded in an amazing way by increasing the footpath distances, by expanding the footpaths onto the roads and by painting the roads, restricting some of the roads for vehicular movement, opening up public spaces, putting up boards about information which says what's the distance people need to maintain, barricading, let's say, play spaces for children because there's a lot of physical contact and touch. Apart from that, we've seen a lot of cities. San Francisco has actively closed down streets for vehicles and moved in people onto the streets, allowing them to rollerblade, skate, play games on the streets. And the same you can see in Milan, in Berlin, in many other cities around the world. This shows that the government is progressive, it's active in response to understanding the social needs of people, and they're willing to make changes to the cityscape that people are part of. So that's a beautiful, let's say, yin-yang situation with the city and the problem the people are facing. So I think that's something very good. What I would see, let's say, in the future, or I hope to see at least, is the data collected from human behavior in cities, resulting in permanent legislative changes about how much percentage of cities should be vehicular. Right now, we do have a lot of roads which cover a lot of space in a city, and that should be reducing ultimately in order to create more space for people on the streets instead of cars. So I hope that these changes that the city has made right now to accommodate more people remains in a way. I hope that the footpaths remain wider. There are more streets which are just bicycle lanes and pedestrian streets. And I hope that translates into bylaws and permanent legislative changes. So yeah, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, I think what you've just shared is actually a key takeaway, learning how maybe some of the changes we've seen as a result of COVID-19 could hopefully lead to a more sustainable future in terms of the design of cities. As you mentioned, for example, creating more people-oriented spaces instead of spaces for vehicles in the city centres. In terms of some of these solutions that are already coming to light, what does their implementation look like so far?
That's a really good question because the crisis brings in a lot of challenges. Some cities have taken upon them in the sense that this is a war situation and we need to act the best that we can with the resources that we have. And that's a very, very good unified front of fighting that's something external, intrusive that has come into cities in a very, let's say, collective way. So in that sense, I think as little as paint is more than enough. A lot of cities have just used color, simple paint, and these movable barricades that are present to do the perfect solution. So in Barcelona, you can see some of the streets being painted yellow, a very bright, happy color that indicates people that now they're welcome to occupy that part of the road. From black to yellow, which is a very, very visual representation, and that has helped people a lot because you can see it, you can spot it, and it's very visual, welcoming. And some cities have responded by adding some simple barricades which are movable later. But these simple materials which cost very, very less or nothing in some cases by reusing, let's say, barricades from before, we've shown a lot is possible. So this proves to us that we don't need a lot of financial assets to make this change, to make this transformation of inclusive cities. And I hope this sticks with us, that, moving forward, that if we want to make alternate streets in a city which has parallel streets into pedestrian, vehicular, all we need is paint. So in a way, even though the pandemic forced us in this direction, I think we should be thankful to it, that it showed us how frugal and how easy innovations can be to get to a point where actually it shows a higher level of satisfaction of inhabitants of a city. So I think one would need very little to make that change.
I love the idea that we can use low-tech solutions as simple as paint to really make a difference in the city landscape and to signal to pedestrians the safe and appropriate way to navigate a city during the new normal we want to create. And something else I want to talk about is, I feel like from my personal perspective, during this time of the virus, we've heard a lot about cities in general, but less maybe about areas of slower economic growth, how they're coping, the changes they're making. What effect will all of this have on areas with less resources, for example, urban slums or rural areas?
We have been seeing mixed results with different urban slums. Some slums have been unfortunate that they were unable to contain the spread of the virus. Some of them have been really actively social distancing and reduced the density of the urban slum in a way of relocating people. And so they show different signs of, let's say, how they've responded. Having said that, urban slums are a systemic failure. They shouldn't exist in the first place, but we are here and they do. So we do hold the responsibility of having that, in a very secure place, because they are the responsible of the city. They are the citizens. They have the same rights as the others do. It's unfortunate they live in a space which is higher dense, less public space, and all of these are problems for us to resolve. Some of them have, let's say, responded by, as I mentioned, reducing the density. So let's say alternating homes or streets have been vacated. So the ones who stay within the urban slum have more spread, have the ability to take a walk but not meet as many people as they did before. And some of them have had more stricter rules in when they can come out. And the most unfortunate would be if they do not have plumbing supplies into their homes. That means even for a basic resource like water, one has to go out to a collection point, which again means physical contact with multiple people, which means like a surface which is a public property needs to be touched by several people, and that space doesn't have the capacity to sanitize it after every person. So slums which have that problem have faced, let's say, much higher risk. And the solution to that is actually not to have urban slums. But in this case, let's say the best is to reduce the density. Move people, relocate them to safety until we pass over, and then come up with solutions as a long-term, and not to do just a band-aid fix.
I completely agree with you. I think sadly COVID-19 in many cases has increased the vulnerability of those who perhaps are already living in compromised circumstances. And as you say, although ideally we're aiming to create cities with housing and structures which cater to the needs of all inhabitants, it's important to recognise that in terms of short-term possibilities, small steps such as social distancing, as you say, can make a big difference where possible. And that leads me on to the final topic I'd like to discuss with you. We've talked a lot about how governments are responding to the situation, but something we haven't really mentioned is what we can do as individuals to deal with COVID-19 in terms of public and private space. what can we do to help the situation?
That's a really good question, because we've discussed before about how a government can play an active role, how an institutional body can play and contribute to this. And having I think, let's say, most governments perform the best they could in this situation. Individuals and citizens of every community have a responsibility to contribute to this. A is if your government or your community body says quarantine 100%, you can only go out for groceries and absolute necessaries. Please do follow that. If you're in a phase of transition, then I would say public spaces are a great way to get that space that you desire, but in a way that if your city has asked you not to sit down in public benches because the point of contact increases, please do follow that. Avoid water fountains, because that's a point of contact that you have with many people and a possible transition point. And then as individuals, I think we can take the responsibility of, let's say, having a walk up the staircase instead of using the elevator, because that's where you would experience another person presence. Or you could cycle instead of taking public transport, because there's less traffic that we are seeing in more and more cities. So that increases health, mental health, and also contributes by reducing the congestion that is present in public transport. And if you have kids and then you have to go to a park, you have to, let's say, encourage them to be active and playful, then I think it could be very good to take a personal play equipment, a ball bought from yourself, and not using, let's say, swings or public property at this point yet, because you're not sure how many people have touched it, and you want to be a responsible citizen by not increasing the, let's say, the numbers of cases. So that could be something very good. And as an architect, if you're a designer, if you're someone out there thinking about solutions, I would recommend you to look in your neighborhood within the 2-kilometer radius and point out any empty land or empty space that is present and unused, and propose something to your local government, propose something to your local mayor, and say like, hey, I've mapped out that these 2 or 1 plot in my neighborhood is empty. How about we do something about it? How about we get some paint there? How about we get some people to come and clean out the space and create more open space for people to come and hang out, or just exercise in a public space, or just take a walk? How about we just paint a circle, as simple as that, to create a walking path for someone? All of these initiatives can be done by anybody, but I think we all have a role to play. These are all just simple practices that we would do otherwise as well.
I think you've given us some really good ideas of how we can individually and then collectively work towards creating safer public spaces at this time, and really go about our daily lives with that purpose of wanting to contribute to a safer society during and after the pandemic. Well, that takes us to the end of today's episode, but Samira, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about reimagining spaces as part of a new normal. Thank you to everyone listening, and I'll catch you soon for the next episode of Innovate with Purpose.